The camera slowly pans across a dimly lit living room. Dust particles dance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains. The room is filled with what most would call clutter, stacks of old magazines, vintage furniture that's seen better days, and cardboard boxes labeled in faded handwriting. But to me, every item tells a story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Kathleen Reed, though everyone has always called me Kathy. I'm 65 years old, and according to my daughter, I'm living in a museum of my own making. She says I'm trapped in yesterday, surrounded by worthless junk that serves no purpose except to remind me of a life that's already over. But what she doesn't understand is that sometimes the past holds treasures that the present hasn't learned to value yet. The sound of tape being ripped from cardboard boxes echoes through my home like a heartbreak on repeat. Sarah, my 35-year-old daughter, moves through my living room with the efficiency of someone who's already made up her mind about everything she sees. Her designer heels click against the hardwood floors that Robert and I installed with our own hands 40 years ago, back when we thought we had all the time in the world to build our dreams together. "Mom, you can't keep living like this," Sarah says without looking up from the box she's examining. Her voice carries that tone I've grown too familiar with, part frustration, part pity, and entirely convinced that she knows what's best for everyone around her. Half of this stuff should have been thrown away decades ago. I watch her hold up a manila folder filled with papers, her nose wrinkling as if the documents themselves offend her. Those papers represent hours of Robert's careful research, nights, when he'd sit at our kitchen table with his reading glasses perched on his nose, studying company reports and market trends by lamplight. But to Sarah, they're just more evidence of my inability to let go of the past. "Your father worked very hard on those research notes," I say quietly, settling into my favorite armchair. The fabric is worn thin in places, and Sarah has mentioned more than once how embarrassing it is when her friends visit. But this chair has held me through countless nights of worry, celebration, and grief. It knows the shape of my sorrow and the weight of my hope. Sarah sighs in that particular way that children perfect when they believe their parents have become burdens rather than blessings. "Dad's been gone for 8 years, Mom." 8 years. Don't you think it's time to start living in the present instead of camping out in memories? The words sting because there's truth in them, even if it's not the whole truth. Robert has been gone for 8 years, 2 months, and 16 days. I know because I've counted every one of them. But what Sarah doesn't understand is that living in the present doesn't mean abandoning everything that brought you to this moment. Some memories aren't meant to be packed away in boxes and forgotten. I am living in the present, I tell her, though my voice lacks the conviction I wish it carried. I'm living in the home your father and I built together, surrounded by the life we created. "You're living in a mausoleum," Sarah counters, her voice rising with the passion she usually reserves for her work presentations. "Look around you, Mom. Really look. When was the last time you bought anything new? When was the last time you went anywhere that wasn't the grocery store or the pharmacy? You've turned this house into a shrine, and it's not healthy." I do look around, and I see what she sees. The wallpaper is faded, the carpet shows decades of wear, and yes, there are more boxes and papers than most people would consider reasonable. But I also see the corner where Sarah took her first steps, the window seat where I used to read her bedtime stories, and the mantelpiece that still holds our wedding photo alongside pictures of every birthday, graduation, and milestone we celebrated as a family. "Your father believed in holding on to things that mattered," I say, running my fingers along the arm of my chair. "He used to say that most people give up too easily, that they don't understand the value of patience." Sarah sets down the folder and turns to face me fully. Her expression softens slightly, and for a moment, I see the little girl who used to climb into this very chair with me on Sunday mornings. "Mom, I know you miss Dad. We all do. but he wouldn't want you living like this. He'd want you to be happy, to be engaged with the world, to be alive. The way she says the word alive cuts deeper than she probably intends. As if choosing to honor my husband's memory somehow makes me less than living. As if the quiet contentment I've found in my routines and my memories is somehow a betrayal of the gift of being here at all. I am alive, I say, and this time my voice is steadier. I'm just not alive in the way you think I should be. Sarah pulls out her phone and starts typing, the way she always does when she's trying to manage a situation that's becoming too emotional for her comfort. I've been thinking, and I've talked to David about this. David is her husband, a man who measures success in quarterly earnings and considers anything older than 5 years to be obsolete. We think you should consider selling this house. The words hang in the air like smoke from a fire that's already burned everything precious to the ground. Sell the house. The house where Robert and I dreamed of growing old together. The house where we raised our daughter and celebrated 37 years of marriage. The house that still holds the echo of his laughter in its walls. Sell the house, I repeat, not quite believing I heard her correctly. Yes, Sarah says, warming to her theme now that she's gotten the difficult part out. You could get a nice apartment, something modern and manageable. No more maintenance, no more yard work, no more. All of this. She gestures around the room as if the accumulated memories of my life are simply obstacles to be cleared away. And what would happen to all of this? I ask, though I'm afraid I already know the answer. Most of it would have to go, Sarah admits. I mean, Mom, be honest. When was the last time you actually looked at half of these papers? Or used any of this furniture? You're holding on to things just because they're old, not because they have any real value. Real value. The phrase echoes in my mind as I watch my daughter continue to sort through boxes with the ruthless efficiency of someone who's never learned that some things can't be measured in dollars and cents. She holds up stock certificates from companies she's never heard of, research papers filled with her father's careful handwriting, and folders full of what she considers obsolete information. But I remember when those stock certificates were new, when Robert would come home from work with his eyes bright with excitement about some new company he'd discovered. Kathy, he'd say, I know it sounds crazy, but I think this internet thing is going to change everything. This company called Amazon, they're selling books online. And this other company, Apple, they're making computers that regular people might actually want to use. I was skeptical then. We didn't have money to throw away on wild schemes and unlikely ventures. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Robert was so sure, so passionate about the possibilities he saw in these emerging technologies. We don't have to invest much, he'd tell me. Just a little bit here and there. Think of it as planting seeds for the future. So we planted seeds. Small amounts. Money we could afford to lose if his instincts were wrong. Amazon at $12 a share. Apple when everyone thought the company was finished. Microsoft when most people didn't even know what Microsoft was. Robert would spend hours researching these companies, reading everything he could find about their business models and their potential for growth. You're gambling with our future, I'd tease him, though I admired his faith in tomorrow. I'm investing in our future. He'd correct me with that smile that made me fall in love with him over and over again. There's a difference between gambling and believing in something that hasn't happened yet. Now Sarah holds those same certificates like they're relics from a lost civilization. And maybe that's exactly what they are. The world Robert believed in has come to pass, but he's not here to see it. The future he invested in became the present while I was busy grieving his absence from it. Mom? Sarah's voice pulls me back to the present moment. Did you hear what I said? I realize I've been staring at the certificates in her hands, lost in memories that feel more real than the conversation happening around me. I'm sorry. What did you say? I said I think we should start with the financial papers. Get them organized or thrown away so we can see what's actually important. She waves the certificates dismissively. I mean, some of these companies don't even exist anymore. If only she knew how wrong she was about that. But how do I explain to someone who measures everything by its immediate utility that some investments take decades to mature? How do I tell my daughter that her father's worthless papers might be worth more than she could ever imagine? Those papers are important to me, I say instead. Why? Sarah asks, and there's genuine confusion in her voice. Mom, honestly, why? What possible value could these old stock certificates have? What purpose do they serve except to take up space and collect dust? The question hangs between us, and I realize I don't have an answer that she would understand. How do I explain that those certificates represent Robert's faith in the future? How do I tell her that every piece of paper she considers worthless was chosen with care and research and hope? They remind me of your father's dreams, I say finally. But Dad's dreams already came true, Sarah says, her voice gentler now. He had a successful career, he had a family, he had a good life. He doesn't need you to keep his old paperwork as some kind of memorial. She's right and wrong at the same time, which makes this conversation infinitely more complicated than either of us wants it to be. Robert did have a successful career as an engineer, and we did have a good life together. But his dreams extended far beyond the boundaries of our daily routine. He dreamed of a world where technology would connect people across impossible distances, where information would be freely available to anyone who wanted it, where small companies with big ideas could change the course of human history. Maybe you're right, I concede, though the words taste like ashes in my mouth. Maybe I am holding on to too much. Sarah's face brightens with the satisfaction of someone who's finally gotten through to a difficult opponent. I'm glad you're starting to see it that way. I know this is hard, but Mom, you deserve better than this. You deserve to live somewhere beautiful and modern, somewhere you can make new memories instead of just preserving old ones. New memories. The phrase strikes me as both hopeful and terrifying. At 65, how many new memories does a person get to make? And do new memories somehow cancel out the old ones? Or do they layer on top of each other like sediment in a riverbed? What about the furniture? I ask, though I'm not sure I want to know the answer. Well, obviously you'd keep the pieces that are actually valuable or that have real sentimental meaning, Sarah says, already moving toward the dining room. But honestly, Mom, most of this stuff is just old. It's not antique, it's not valuable, it's just old. I follow her into the dining room, where she's examining the table Robert and I bought when Sarah was 10 years old. We saved for months to afford it, shopping at every furniture store in 3 counties before finding one that fit both our budget and our vision of what family dinners should look like. Sarah did her homework at this table for 8 years. We played board games here on rainy Sunday afternoons. Robert and I shared countless cups of coffee at this table in the early morning hours before the world woke up and demanded our attention. This table has seen a lot of family history, I say. I know, Mom, and that's sweet. But look at it objectively. The finish is worn, there are water rings from glasses, and honestly, it's just not the kind of piece that would work in a modern apartment. Sarah runs her hand over the surface, and I can see her cataloging every imperfection. You need furniture that's practical and contemporary, not pieces that require constant maintenance and don't match anything current. Contemporary, current, modern. Sarah's vocabulary is filled with words that suggest constant forward motion, as if staying still long enough to appreciate what you already have is somehow a moral failing. But what happens to the people who find meaning in the worn places and the water rings? What happens to those of us who see beauty in the evidence of a life well lived? Your father refinished this table twice, I tell her. Once when you were in high school and you decided you wanted to be an artist, and you used it as your canvas for a month before we convinced you to move your supplies to your bedroom. And once about 5 years before he died, when he decided we needed a project to work on together. That's a lovely memory, Mom, but it doesn't make the table valuable to anyone else. Anyone else. There's the crux of the matter, isn't it? Sarah is already thinking about resale value, about what strangers might want to buy from the estate of our life together. She's not thinking about what these things mean to the person who still lives here, who still sits at this table every morning with her coffee and her memories. I'm not ready to sell the house, I say quietly. Sarah stops examining the table and turns to look at me with the expression she gets when she's trying to be patient with someone who's being unreasonable. Mom, you can't afford to maintain this place forever. The property taxes alone are going to eat up your savings, and that's not even considering what happens when the roof needs to be replaced or the furnace gives out. She's not wrong about the practical concerns. Living on Robert's pension and Social Security doesn't leave much room for major repairs or unexpected expenses. But selling the house feels like admitting that the life Robert and I built together has run its course, that it's time to pack up our dreams and move into something smaller and more manageable. I know it's not practical, I admit. But this house is all I have left of the life your father and I planned together. Mom, you have memories. You have photographs. You have all the love and experiences you shared. You don't need to live in a museum to keep those things alive. But that's where Sarah is wrong, though I can't find the words to explain it in a way she'd understand. It's not about keeping memories alive. It's about living inside them, about waking up each morning in the space where those memories were. It's about feeling connected to the person I was when Robert was here to share the world with me. What if I'm not ready to be the person I become when I leave this house? I ask. The question seems to catch Sarah off guard. She sets down the vase she's been examining and really looks at me for the first time since she arrived. What do you mean? I mean, what if the person I am in this house, surrounded by these things, is the person I want to be? What if I don't want to become someone who lives in a modern apartment with contemporary furniture and no connection to the past? Sarah is quiet for a long moment, and I can see her struggling to understand a perspective that's completely foreign to her experience. At 35, she's never had to reinvent herself after losing the person who helped define who she was. She's never had to figure out how to be herself without the other half of herself. Mom, she says finally, you're not just the person you were when Dad was alive. You're still Kathy Reed. You're still my mother. You're still the woman who raised me and taught me how to be strong and independent. You don't disappear just because Dad isn't here anymore. But I feel like I might, I confess. I feel like if I leave this house, if I get rid of all these things that connect me to the life we had together, I might forget who I was when I was happy. The words hang in the air between us, heavier than I intended them to be. Sarah's face softens, and for a moment I see the compassionate woman I raised instead of the efficient problem solver who's been trying to reorganize my life. Oh, Mom, she says, and there's genuine sadness in her voice. Is that what you think? That you were only happy when Dad was alive? The question forces me to examine feelings I've been avoiding for 8 years. Was I only happy when Robert was alive, or have I simply convinced myself that happiness ended when he did? Have I been so focused on preserving the life we had together that I've forgotten how to build a life of my own? I don't know, I answer honestly. I don't know if I remember how to be happy without him. Sarah moves closer and sits on the arm of my chair, something she hasn't done since she was a teenager. Mom, you're allowed to be happy again. Dad would want you to be happy. He'd probably be pretty upset if he knew you were sitting in this house every day feeling like your life ended when his did. But what if I try to be happy and I can't? What if I sell the house and get rid of everything and move somewhere new, and I discover that I'm just as sad in a modern apartment as I am here? Then at least you'll know you tried, Sarah says, and maybe you'll discover that you're stronger, than you think you are. Before we can continue this conversation, Sarah's phone buzzes with a text message. She glances at it and frowns. "I'm sorry, Mom. I have to take this call. It's about the Henderson account." She steps outside to take her call, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the boxes she's been sorting through. I pick up one of the stock certificates she dismissed so casually, running my fingers over Robert's signature at the bottom. He signed these documents with such confidence, such faith in possibilities that existed only in his imagination. Amazon, com. I read aloud, noting the date on the certificate. 1997. We bought 50 shares at $12 each, $600 that felt like a huge risk at the time. Robert was so excited about this company that sold books through the internet. "Kathy," he'd said, "they're not just selling books, they're reimagining commerce itself." I remember laughing at his enthusiasm. "It's just books, Robert. How revolutionary can selling books be?" "That's what everyone said about automobiles when they were just horseless carriages," he'd replied. "Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas start with the most ordinary applications." I set the certificate down and pick up another one. Apple Computer, purchased in 1998 after the company released something called the iMac. Robert had insisted we buy a computer, even though neither of us really knew what to do with it. "The world is going digital, Kathy," he'd said. "We need to be part of that world, not observers of it." Now I look around my house and realize that Sarah is probably right about one thing. I have become an observer rather than a participant. I've spent 8 years preserving the world Robert and I shared instead of engaging with the world that exists now. But does that make me wrong, or does it just make me different from the person Sarah thinks I should be? Sarah returns from her phone call looking stressed and distracted. "Sorry about that. Work crisis. Where were we?" "We were talking about whether I'm allowed to be happy," I say. "Right. And the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Mom, you're 65 years old. You could have 20 or 30 more years ahead of you. That's a lot of time to spend sitting in this house feeling sorry for yourself." The bluntness of her words stings, but there's truth in them that I can't deny. 20 or 30 more years is a long time to spend in limbo, neither fully living in the present nor truly honoring the past. "What would you want me to do?" I ask. "I want you to sell this house and find somewhere that makes you excited about waking up in the morning," Sarah says. "I want you to get rid of all this clutter that's weighing you down and keeping you stuck. I want you to buy some new clothes and take some classes and maybe even go on a date or two." A date? The idea is so foreign to me that I almost laugh. "Sarah, I was married to your father for 37 years. I don't even remember how to talk to men who aren't him. So you'll learn. Mom, you're beautiful and smart and funny, and there are probably dozens of men your age who would be thrilled to spend time with you. But they're never going to meet you if you're hiding in this house surrounded by boxes of old papers." Old papers. I look at the certificates scattered across the coffee table and wonder what Robert would think about Sarah's assessment of his investment research. Would he be amused by her dismissal of these companies he believed in so strongly? Would he be proud that his instincts about the future turned out to be so accurate? "What if I told you that these old papers might be worth something?" I ask. Sarah glances at the certificates and shrugs. "Mom, even if some of these companies are still around, these old paper certificates probably aren't valid anymore. Everything's digital now. And besides, how much could Dad have invested? I mean, you guys were always careful with money." She's right that we were careful with money, but that's exactly why Robert's investment strategy worked so well. Instead of putting large amounts into risky ventures, he invested small amounts consistently over many years. Instead of chasing quick profits, he bought shares in companies he believed would still be important decades later. "Your father was very thoughtful about his investments," I say carefully. "I'm sure he was, but Mom, let's be realistic. Dad was An engineer, not a financial advisor. And even if he made some good choices, we're probably talking about a few $1,000s at most. That's not enough to change your situation significantly. A few $1,000s. If only she knew how. Dramatically, she's underestimating her father's financial acumen. But how do I tell her that without sounding like I'm making excuses to avoid the difficult decisions she wants me to make? Maybe you're right, I say instead, though the words feel like a betrayal of Robert's memory. I know this is hard, Mom. I know it feels like I'm asking you to give up everything that matters to you. But I'm not. I'm asking you to make room for new things to matter. I'm asking you to trust that you can build a life that honors Dad's memory without turning your entire existence into a monument to him. Sarah's phone buzzes again, and she glances at it with obvious frustration. I'm so sorry, Mom, but I really do have to get back to the office. This client is having a complete meltdown, and I'm the only one who can talk them off the ledge. She gathers her purse and keys, moving with the efficient urgency that seems to define her entire approach to life. Everything is a crisis to be managed, a problem to be solved, a situation to be optimized for maximum efficiency. Will you at least think about what we talked about? She asks as she heads toward the door. I'll think about it, I promise, though I'm not sure what exactly I'm agreeing to consider. Good. And Mom, I love you. I know it doesn't always sound like it when we have these conversations, but everything I'm saying comes from a place of wanting you to be happy and healthy and engaged with life. After she leaves, I sit in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by the boxes she's been sorting through and the certificates she considers worthless. The afternoon light has shifted, casting longer shadows across the floor, and the dust. Particles that were dancing earlier have settled back into their resting places. I pick up Robert's investment journal, a leather-bound notebook where he recorded every purchase and his reasoning behind it. His handwriting fills page after page, documenting his research and his hopes for the future. Amazon continues to expand. Beyond books, reads one entry from 1999. I believe they will become the general store of the internet age. Another entry, from 2001, discusses Apple's potential for reinvention under Steve Jobs' leadership. The technology exists to put a computer in everyone's pocket, Robert wrote. Apple understands better than anyone how to make complex technology simple and beautiful. Reading his words now, I'm struck by how clearly he saw the future that was coming. While most people were skeptical of internet commerce and personal computers, Robert was investing in the companies that would define the next 2 decades of human progress. But Sarah is right about one thing. I haven't checked on these investments in years. After Robert died, dealing with financial paperwork felt too overwhelming, too connected to all the plans we'd made together that would never come to fruition. I let the statements pile up unopened, assuming that whatever small amounts we'd invested had probably disappeared in market crashes or corporate failures. What if Sarah is wrong about the value of these investments? What if Robert's faith in the future was even more prescient than he realized? What if the modest amounts we invested over the years have grown into something significant? The thought is both thrilling and terrifying. If these investments have indeed grown substantially, it would change everything about my financial situation. I wouldn't need to worry about property taxes or roof repairs or furnace replacements. I could afford to keep the house and maintain it properly. I could afford to make choices based on what I want rather than what I can afford. But it would also mean that Sarah's entire assessment of my situation is wrong. It would mean that the worthless clutter she wants me to dispose of includes documents worth more than she could imagine. It would mean that her father's dreams weren't just sentimental relics, but practical foundations for a secure future. I close the investment journal and look around my living room with new eyes. What if this isn't a mausoleum to the past, but a treasure vault I've simply forgotten how to access? What if the life Robert and I built together included provisions for the life I would need to live without him? The questions swirl in my mind as the afternoon fades into evening. Tomorrow, I decide, I'll do something I haven't done in 8 years. I'll call the brokerage firm and ask about the status of our old accounts. I'll find out whether Robert's faith in the future was justified or whether Sarah is right that it's time to let go of the past and embrace an uncertain but potentially liberating future. Either way, I realize, it's time to stop living in limbo between what was and what might be. It's time to find out what my life is actually worth and what possibilities that knowledge might create. The morning light filters through my bedroom curtains, casting familiar patterns across the hardwood floor that Robert and I refinished together in 1987. I've been awake since 4:30, my mind churning with questions I've avoided for nearly a decade. The investment journal sits on my nightstand like a sleeping secret, waiting to reveal whether my husband's quiet confidence in the future was vindicated or if I'm simply a widow clinging to false hope. I make my coffee in the same blue ceramic mug I've used every morning for the past 15 years, the one with the small chip near the handle that Robert always said gave it character. The kitchen feels different today, charged with possibility in a way I haven't experienced since before he died. Every familiar object seems to be holding its breath, waiting to discover whether this house is a sanctuary or a prison. The brokerage statements are exactly where I left them 8 years ago, stacked in the bottom drawer of Robert's desk in what used to be his study. I haven't disturbed this room much since his death, and dust motes dance in the morning sunlight as I settle into his leather chair. The smell of his cologne has long since faded, but I can still feel his presence in the careful organization of his files and the way he arranged his reference books according to some system only he understood. My hands shake slightly as I open the first envelope, dated 3 months after Robert's funeral. The numbers on the page swim before my eyes, and for a moment I wonder if grief has finally affected my vision. But no, the figures are clear enough. They're just so much larger than I expected that my brain struggles to process them. Amazon, 4,247 shares. Current value, $847,383. I set the statement down and reach for my reading glasses, certain I've misread something fundamental. But the numbers remain stubbornly consistent. 4,247 shares of Amazon stock, purchased in small batches between 1997 and 2003, now worth nearly $850,000. My coffee grows cold as I work through the pile of statements, each one revealing another piece of Robert's financial legacy that I've ignored for almost a decade. Apple stock purchased at various prices between 1998 and 2005, now worth over $2 million after multiple stock splits. Microsoft shares bought gradually during the late 1990s, currently valued at just over $1 million. Google stock from their initial public offering in 2004, Tesla from their early days when most people thought electric cars were a fantasy, Netflix when they were still mailing DVDs. By the time I reach the bottom of the pile, my hands are trembling so violently that I can barely hold the papers. The total value of our investment portfolio, as of the most recent statements, exceeds $20 million. $20 million. I say the number aloud, but it sounds foreign in my kitchen, like a phrase from a language I've never learned to speak. $20 million accumulated through patient, methodical investing by a man who understood that the future would be different from the present in ways that most people couldn't imagine. Robert, what did you do? The question echoes in the silence of his study as I try to reconcile the modest engineer I married with the financial visionary these statements reveal him to have been. We lived carefully, never extravagantly. We drove used cars and took modest vacations and worried about college tuition for Sarah like every other middle-class family. How did he manage to accumulate this kind of wealth without my noticing? But even as I ask the question, I know the answer. Robert didn't accumulate wealth through dramatic gestures or risky speculation. He built it slowly, steadily, through the same patient persistence he brought to every other aspect of his life. Instead of buying expensive toys or luxury items, He bought shares in companies he believed would shape the future. Instead of seeking immediate gratification, he planted financial seeds that would grow for decades. I remember now the conversations I dismissed as his harmless obsession with technology. "Kathy," he'd say over dinner, "do you realize that Google processes more information in a single day than existed in the entire world 50 years ago?" Or, "This company Tesla, they're not just making electric cars, they're reimagining transportation itself." I thought he was being fanciful, indulging in speculation about a future that felt impossibly distant from our daily reality. But he wasn't speculating. He was planning. Every stock purchase, every small investment, was part of a larger vision he carried in his mind like an architect's blueprint for a building that wouldn't be constructed for decades. The phone feels heavy in my hand as I dial the number for Merrill Lynch, the brokerage firm that has been managing our accounts since Robert opened them in the mid-1990s. The automated system guides me through a series of security questions, asking for information that feels like archaeological artifacts from a previous life. Mother's maiden name, first pet's name, the street where we lived when Sarah was born. "Mrs. Reed?" The voice belongs to a young man who sounds like he could be Sarah's age. "This is Marcus Chen from Merrill Lynch. I see you're calling about account number ending in 4782. "Yes," I manage, though my voice sounds strange to my own ears. "I haven't checked on these accounts in several years, and I wanted to verify the current balances." "Of course, Mrs. Reed. I'm looking at your accounts now, and I have to say, your husband had remarkable foresight. These are some of the most successful long-term positions I've seen in my career." "So the statements I received are accurate?" "Absolutely. And Mrs. Reed, if I may ask, have you been working with a financial advisor since your husband's passing?" The question catches me off guard. "No, I haven't touched these accounts at all since he died." "Well, that's actually been a very wise strategy," Marcus says, and I can hear the amazement in his voice. "Your husband's investment philosophy was clearly focused on long-term growth, and the intervening years have been exceptionally kind to the positions he established. The total value of your portfolio has increased by approximately 340% since 2016. 340%. I try to calculate what that means in practical terms, but the numbers are too large for my mind to grasp. 8 years ago, when I was too overwhelmed by grief to pay attention to financial statements, this portfolio was worth approximately $6 million. Now it's worth more than $20 million. "Mrs. Reed, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here. I'm just processing this information." "I understand completely. It's quite remarkable. Would you like to schedule an appointment to discuss your options? There are some strategies we might consider for tax optimization and estate planning." Estate planning. The phrase brings me back to earth with uncomfortable force. Sarah's words from yesterday echo in my memory. The property taxes that are eating into my savings, the maintenance costs that feel insurmountable on my fixed income, the pressure to sell the house and simplify my life. All of those concerns, I realize now, were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of my financial situation. I don't need to sell the house. I don't need to dispose of Robert's belongings or downsize to a modern apartment. I can afford to maintain this house exactly as it is for the rest of my life, and still leave Sarah an inheritance beyond her wildest dreams. But that realization brings its own complicated emotions. If I reveal the true extent of my wealth, how will it change my relationship with my daughter? Will she see me differently, knowing that I allowed her to worry about my financial security while sitting on a fortune? Will she understand that I genuinely didn't know about the portfolio's growth, or will she think I was testing her somehow? "Mrs. Reed." "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen. Could I call you back to schedule an appointment?" I need some time to think about all of this. "Of course. And Mrs. Reed, congratulations. Your husband was clearly a very smart man." After I hang up, I sit in Robert's chair and try to absorb the magnitude of what I've discovered. The investment. Journal lies open beside me, filled with his careful notes about market trends and company fundamentals. Each entry represents hours of research, phone calls to brokerage firms, and quiet confidence in possibilities that most people couldn't see. Netflix is expanding their streaming service, reads one entry from 2007. Physical media is becoming obsolete. This company understands that entertainment will be delivered digitally in the future. Another note from 2008 discusses Tesla's potential despite widespread skepticism about electric vehicles. The infrastructure will follow the demand, Robert wrote. Once people experience the performance advantages of electric motors, internal combustion engines will seem primitive. His handwriting fills page after page, documenting a vision of the future that was so accurate, it seems almost prophetic now. But it wasn't prophecy. It was research, patience, and the courage to invest in change rather than fighting against it. I close the journal and walk to the window that overlooks our backyard. The garden Robert planted still blooms every spring, though I've neglected it shamefully since his death. The apple tree he grafted with 3 different varieties still produces fruit each fall, and the stone path he laid by hand still guides visitors from the back door to the small gazebo where we used to sit on summer evenings. This house, this life, this carefully tended space where we built our dreams together, all of it is secure now in ways I never imagined possible. I don't have to choose between honoring Robert's memory and facing financial reality. His memory includes the financial reality he created for exactly this situation. But what do I do with this knowledge? How do I process the discovery that my husband's quiet investments have made me wealthy beyond anything we ever discussed or planned for together? How do I reconcile the careful, modest life we lived with the expansive possibilities this money represents? The doorbell interrupts my contemplation, and I realize I've been sitting in Robert's study for over 3 hours. Sarah stands on my front porch with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of determined cheerfulness that I recognize as her approach to difficult conversations. "I brought caffeine," she announces as I let her in. I figured we both needed fortification for another round of dealing with reality. Reality. The word strikes me as ironic, given what I've just discovered about the true nature of my financial situation. But I don't say anything as Sarah settles into the living room and surveys the boxes she was sorting through yesterday. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she continues, "and I want to apologize if I seemed pushy or insensitive. I know this is hard for you, and I know it feels like I'm asking you to abandon everything that matters to you." "You weren't wrong about the practical concerns," I say carefully. "This house does require maintenance, and living on a fixed income does present challenges." "Exactly. And Mom, I've been doing some research on senior communities in the area. There are some really beautiful places, designed specifically for people who want to maintain their independence while having access to services and social activities." Sarah pulls out her phone and begins showing me photographs of elegant apartments with modern kitchens and spacious living areas. The marketing materials emphasize words like active, vibrant, and community, painting a picture of senior living that bears no resemblance to the nursing homes of previous generations. "Look at this one," she says, swiping to show me a sunlit apartment with large windows and updated fixtures. "It's only 20 minutes from my house, so I could visit regularly. And they have a book club and exercise classes, and they organize trips to museums and theaters. The apartment is lovely, and I can see the appeal of a lifestyle that includes built-in social activities and professional maintenance services. But looking at these generic, comfortable spaces, I feel a profound sense of disconnection. These are places designed for a generic version of old age, for people who are ready to trade the complications of individual life for the simplicity of managed existence." "It looks very nice," I say, because Sarah has clearly put effort into this research. "And the best part is that these places handle all the maintenance and upkeep. No more worrying about roof repairs or property taxes or yard work. You could just focus on enjoying your life instead of managing all the details of homeownership. Enjoying my life. The phrase assumes that my current life is somehow lacking in enjoyment, that the daily routines I've developed in this house represent a burden rather than a choice. But what if I actually enjoy the responsibility of maintaining the space Robert and I created together? What if managing the details of home ownership keeps me connected to the person I was when he was alive to share those responsibilities with? Me? Sarah, I begin, then stop. How do I explain that I've just discovered I'm worth $20 million without sounding like I've lost my mind? What, Mom? What if my financial situation isn't as precarious as we thought? Sarah looks up from her phone with the expression she gets when she's trying to be patient with someone who's being unrealistic. Mom, we've been through this. Dad's pension and your Social Security are fine for basic living expenses, but they don't leave much room for major repairs or unexpected costs. That's not criticism, that's just math. But what if there were other resources we haven't considered? Like what? Mom? I helped Dad organize his financial papers before he died, remember? I know what you're working with. This is the moment when I should tell her about the investment portfolio, about the $20 million that changes everything about my options and her assumptions. But something holds me back. Maybe it's the memory of how dismissively she handled Robert's stock certificates yesterday. Or maybe it's a desire to understand my own situation before sharing it with someone who's already made up her mind about what I should do. I just think there might be some accounts or investments that haven't been fully evaluated, I say instead. Sarah sets down her coffee and looks at me with the focused attention she usually reserves for work crises. Mom, what? Accounts? What investments? Are you talking about Dad's old stock certificates? Because honestly, even if some of those companies are still around, we're probably talking about small amounts of money. Small amounts. I think about the Amazon shares alone, worth nearly $1 million, and wonder how to bridge the gap between Sarah's assumptions and the reality I've discovered. Your father was very thorough in his financial planning, I say carefully. I know he was, Mom. He was careful and responsible, and he made sure you'd be taken care of. But taken care of, in Dad's terms, meant having enough to live modestly, not having enough to maintain a 4-bedroom house indefinitely. What if you're wrong about that? The question seems to frustrate Sarah, and she stands up to pace around the living room the way she does when she's trying to work through a complicated problem. Mom, I'm not trying to be harsh, but I think grief might be affecting your judgment about your financial situation. You want Dad to have left you with more resources than he actually did, because that would mean you don't have to make hard choices about the future. Grief affecting my judgment. The accusation stings because there's enough truth in it to make me defensive. I have spent 8 years avoiding difficult decisions about money, about the house, about my future. But not because I was in denial about my resources, because I was overwhelmed by the complexity of managing resources I didn't understand. What if I told you that your father's investments were worth significantly more than either of us realized? I ask. Sarah stops pacing and turns to face me directly. How much more? The moment hangs between us like a bridge I'm not sure I'm ready to cross. Once I tell her the truth about the portfolio, everything about our relationship will change. She'll stop seeing me as someone who needs to be managed and protected, but she might also start seeing me as someone who's been hiding important information from her. More than enough to maintain this house comfortably, I say finally. Mom, define more than enough. Are we talking about an extra $50,000? $100,000? Because even if Dad left you more than we thought, the basic reality doesn't change. You're still a woman living alone in a house that's too big for one person, in a neighborhood where you don't really connect with anyone anymore. What if we were talking about enough money that financial considerations weren't part of the equation at all? Sarah's expression shifts from patience to concern. Mom, Exactly how much money do you think Dad left you? The question demands a direct answer, and I realize I can't keep dancing around the truth without seeming evasive or confused. But I also can't simply announce that I'm worth $20 million without providing context that will help her understand how this discovery is as much a surprise to me as it would be to her. I found some brokerage statements this morning that I haven't looked at in several years. I begin. Okay, and what did they say? They said that your father's investment strategy was more successful than either of us understood while he was alive. Sarah sits back down, and I can see her shifting into problem-solving mode. How successful? Mom, I need specific numbers if we're going to have a realistic conversation about your options. Specific numbers. I think about Marcus Chen's voice on the phone, about the 340% growth over the past 8 years, about investment positions that have turned Robert's careful research into generational wealth. The portfolio is currently worth approximately $20 million, I say quietly. The words land in the space between us like stones dropped into still water. Sarah's face goes through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally something that might be shock or anger or both. $20 million, she repeats slowly. Yes. Mom, that's not possible. Dad was an engineer, not a hedge fund manager. There's no way he could have accumulated that kind of money without us knowing about it. He didn't accumulate it all at once. He built it slowly, over decades, by investing small amounts in companies he believed would be important in the future. Sarah stands up again, but this time her pacing has an agitated quality that suggests she's trying to process information that doesn't fit her understanding of the world. Mom, people don't accidentally become multimillionaires. If Dad had that kind of money, we would have known. You would have lived differently, spent differently, planned differently. But that's exactly the point, I say, surprised by the clarity that comes with finally speaking this truth aloud. Your father didn't want us to live differently. He wanted us to live according to our values and our needs, not according to our investment portfolio. He wanted to build wealth without letting wealth define our lives. That's... Sarah struggles for words. That's insane. Who does that? Who sits on $20 million and continues to worry about property taxes and college tuition and whether they can afford a decent vacation? Someone who understands that money is a tool, not a goal, I say, echoing something Robert used to tell me when I questioned his modest lifestyle, despite his growing investment success. Mom, are you absolutely certain about these numbers? Because if you're wrong, if you've misread something or made a calculation error, this conversation is going to be really painful for both of us. I walk to Robert's study and return with the brokerage statements, handing them to Sarah without comment. I watch her face as she scans the numbers, her expression moving through disbelief toward reluctant acceptance. These are real, she says. Finally? Yes. And you haven't touched any of this money since Dad died? I didn't even know it existed in this form. I knew your father had some investments, but I thought we were talking about a few $1,000s, maybe enough to help with unexpected expenses. Sarah sets down the statements and looks around the living room with new eyes. So, when I was telling you to sell the house because you couldn't afford to maintain it, you were trying to help me solve a problem that didn't actually exist. The silence that follows is complicated, filled with implications neither of us is quite ready to address. Sarah's entire approach to our relationship has been based on the assumption that I need her guidance and protection. Learning that I'm financially independent in ways she never imagined requires her to reconsider not just my situation, but her role in my life. Why didn't you tell me? She asks finally. Because I didn't know. I spent 8 years avoiding financial paperwork because it reminded me too much of your father. I let the statements pile up unopened, assuming that whatever small investments he'd made had probably disappeared in market crashes or corporate failures. But Mom, didn't you wonder? Didn't you question why the accounts were still generating statements if they didn't contain anything significant? The question forces me to confront my own willful ignorance about practical matters I found too painful to address. I was grieving, I say simply. I was trying to get through each day without falling apart completely. Managing investment portfolios felt impossibly complicated compared to the simple task of just surviving. Sarah picks up one of the Amazon statements and studies it carefully. 4,000 shares, she reads aloud. Dad bought Amazon stock when it was $12 a share, and now it's worth over $200 a share. Your father believed that internet commerce would change the way people shop. Apparently, he was right. Sarah's voice carries a mixture of admiration and something that might be regret. Mom, do you realize what this means? It means I don't have to sell the house, I say. It means you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. It means you have choices that most people can only dream about. Choices. The word carries both liberation and burden. For 8 years, my options have been limited by grief, financial constraints, and the assumption that my life was essentially over except for the maintenance required to get through each day. Now suddenly, I have the resources to live however I choose, to go wherever I want, to become whoever I decide to be. But with unlimited choices comes the responsibility of choosing well. How do you decide what to do with your life when you can do virtually anything? How do you honor the memory of the person who made those choices possible while still living your own life? Sarah, I say slowly, I need you to understand something. Learning about this money doesn't change how I feel about this house or your father's belongings or the life we built together. It just means I don't have to choose between honoring that life and facing practical reality. But Mom, it also means you could choose to do something completely different. You could travel, you could move somewhere warm, you could buy a house, on the beach or in the mountains or wherever you've always wanted to live. The possibilities she's describing sound appealing in the abstract, but they also feel disconnected from the person I actually am. Yes, I could afford to live anywhere, but do I want to live anywhere other than the place where my memories are rooted? Yes, I could afford to travel extensively, but do I want to explore the world alone, without Robert to share the discoveries? What if what I've always wanted is exactly what I have? I ask. Then you keep it, Sarah says, though I can hear the frustration in her voice. But, Mom, you could keep it and also have other things. You could maintain this house and also have an apartment in Paris. You could preserve Dad's study and also see the places you've always talked about visiting. An apartment in Paris. The idea seems so far removed from my daily reality that I can barely comprehend it. But Sarah is right that money removes the barriers between desire and possibility. If I wanted to spend a month in France, or take a cruise through the Mediterranean, or visit the museums and historical sites Robert and I used to read about together, I could do any or all of those things. I think I need time to process all of this, I say. Of course you do. Mom, this is incredible news. This is the kind of financial security that most families never achieve across multiple generations. Multiple generations. The phrase reminds me that this wealth isn't just about my choices and my future. It's also about the legacy Robert and I will leave for Sarah and her children. It's about opportunities and security that will extend far beyond my lifetime. Sarah, what would you do if you were in my position? The question seems to catch her off guard. She's been so focused on managing what she perceived as my limitations that she hasn't considered what she would choose if those limitations didn't exist. I honestly don't know, she admits. I've spent so much energy trying to convince you to make practical choices that I haven't thought about what I would do with unlimited possibilities. Maybe that's something we could figure out together, I suggest. Sarah looks around the living room one more time, but now her expression is contemplative rather than critical. You know what's funny? Yesterday, I was looking at this room and seeing clutter and outdated furniture and evidence of someone who was stuck in the past. But now I'm looking at the same room and seeing the home of someone who has the luxury of choosing exactly how she wants to live. It's the same room, I point out. But it's not the same situation. Yesterday, keeping all of this stuff seemed like an inability to face reality. Today, it seems like a conscious choice to prioritize sentimental value over practical considerations. The difference in perception fascinates me. The objects in this room haven't changed, but their meaning has shifted completely based on new information about my circumstances. The worn furniture that seemed like evidence of financial limitation now appears to be evidence of values that prioritize comfort and familiarity over appearances. I think I understand now why Dad lived the way he did, Sarah continues. He could have afforded anything, but he chose to live according to his values instead of his bank account. Your father believed that the best things in life couldn't be purchased, I say. He thought that once you had enough money to meet your needs and pursue your interests, additional wealth was only valuable if it could be used to help other people or secure the future for the people you loved. And he secured your future pretty comprehensively. He secured our future, I correct her. This money isn't just about my security, it's about yours and your children's as well. Sarah's eyes widen as she realizes the full implications of what we've discovered. Mom, I have student loans. David and I have been talking about buying a bigger house, but we didn't think we could afford it. We've been worried about how we'll pay for the kids' college education. Those worries just became much less pressing, I say gently. The conversation that follows is different from any we've had since Robert died. Instead of Sarah trying to manage my limitations, we're exploring possibilities that neither of us had imagined. Instead of focusing on what I can't afford to do, we're considering what I might choose to do with resources that remove financial constraints from the equation entirely. But even as we talk about potential trips and home improvements and charitable giving, I find myself drawn back to the question of what Robert would want me to do with the wealth he accumulated so carefully and quietly. He built this financial security not as an end in itself, but as a foundation for choices that would align with the values we shared throughout our marriage. The afternoon passes quickly as Sarah and I sort through not just the investment statements, but the implications of discovering that our family's financial reality is completely different from what either of us understood. By the time she prepares to leave, we've tentatively planned for me to meet with Marcus Chen to discuss the portfolio in detail and to consider options for tax-efficient management of assets I'm still learning to comprehend. Mom, Sarah says, as she gathers her things, I owe you an apology. I've spent the last year treating you like someone who needed to be rescued from her own poor judgment. I didn't realize that your choices were based on different information than I was working with. You were trying to help, I say. You saw what looked like problems that needed solving, and you offered solutions. That's what caring people do. But I didn't listen carefully enough to understand that you might have reasons for your choices that I couldn't see from my perspective. After Sarah leaves, I sit in the growing dusk of my living room and try to absorb the magnitude of how much has changed in a single day. This morning, I woke up as a widow living on a fixed income, worried about property taxes and roof repairs. Tonight, I'm going to sleep as someone with the financial resources to live however I choose, wherever I choose, for as long as I choose. The transformation feels surreal, like discovering that I've been living in a smaller version of my life than necessary. But it also feels overwhelming. How do you suddenly become someone with $20 million when you've spent decades learning to live carefully within modest means? I pick up Robert's investment journal and read one final entry, dated just 3 months before his death. The future is always more surprising than we expect, he wrote. But the principles that guide wise decisions remain constant across time. Patience, research, and faith in human innovation will always be rewarded, even when the rewards take longer than expected to materialize. Patience, research, and faith in human innovation. These were the principles that guided Robert's investment decisions, but they were also the principles that guided his approach to marriage, parenthood, and life itself. He didn't accumulate wealth by abandoning his values. He accumulated it by staying true to those values over long periods of time, even when the immediate results weren't visible. Tomorrow, I'll begin the process of learning how to be a wealthy person, how to manage resources I never expected to have, how to make choices that honor both Robert's legacy and my own desires for the future. But tonight, I'm content to sit in the house we built together, surrounded by the belongings Sarah once called clutter, grateful for the patient love of a man who prepared for possibilities he wouldn't live to see realized. The morning air carries the scent of blooming lilacs as I walk up the steps to the Merrill Lynch office building, my leather handbag clutched tightly against my side. Inside that bag are documents that represent a lifetime of careful planning by a man who understood patience better than anyone I've ever known. 3 weeks have passed since I discovered the true extent of Robert's investment legacy, and today I'm finally ready to understand what it all means. Marcus Chen greets me in the lobby with the kind of respectful attention I've never experienced at a financial institution. He's younger than I expected, probably in his early 30s, with an earnest demeanor that reminds me of Robert when he was first starting his engineering career. His handshake is firm but gentle, and when he speaks about my portfolio, there's genuine admiration in his voice, rather than the condescending patience I've grown accustomed to receiving from younger professionals. "Mrs. Reed, it's truly an honor to meet you," he says as we settle into his office. "Your husband's investment strategy is something we study here as an example of disciplined, long-term thinking. In 30 years of working in this industry, I've rarely seen anyone demonstrate such consistent faith in technological innovation paired with such careful risk management." The office overlooks the downtown district where Robert used to work, and I can see the building where he spent 42 years designing systems that most people took for granted. Water treatment plants, traffic management systems, infrastructure projects that required the same kind of long-term thinking he brought to his investment decisions. He understood that the most important work often happened slowly, invisibly, building foundations that would support growth for decades to come. I'm still trying to understand how he managed to accumulate this much wealth without my really noticing, I confess, as Marcus spreads the portfolio summary across his desk. "That's actually not uncommon with successful long-term investors," he explains. "The growth happens gradually over such extended periods that it can feel almost abstract. Your husband was reinvesting dividends, benefiting from stock splits, and allowing compound interest to work its magic over multiple decades. The dramatic growth often becomes apparent only when you step back and look at the total picture." He walks me through each major position, explaining how Robert's initial investments have multiplied through stock splits and reinvestment strategies. The Amazon shares we bought for $12 each have split multiple times and now represent a value of over $200 per original share. The Apple stock purchased during the company's near-bankruptcy period has become one of the most valuable holdings in the portfolio. "Your husband had remarkable timing," Marcus continues, "but more importantly, he had remarkable patience. He bought these stocks when most people were skeptical about their prospects, and he held them through market crashes, economic recessions, and periods when many investors would have sold out of fear or impatience. He always said that the best time to invest in something was when other people thought you were crazy for believing in it," I tell Marcus, remembering countless dinner conversations where Robert would defend his latest stock purchase against my gentle skepticism. That philosophy served him extraordinarily well. "Mrs. Reed, I hope you understand that this portfolio puts you in a very exclusive category of wealth. You have more financial resources than 99% of American families, and with proper management, these assets should continue growing for many generations." Many generations. The phrase brings back Sarah's words about legacy and the responsibilities that come with unexpected wealth. But it also raises questions I've been avoiding about what Robert intended for this money and what obligations I might have to use it in ways that honor his values. Mr. Chen, may I ask you something about estate planning? Of course. If someone wanted to ensure that this kind of wealth was used responsibly to help people rather than just accumulate for its own sake, what options would be available? Marcus leans forward with the interest of someone who's clearly passionate about the more meaningful aspects of wealth management. There are numerous philanthropic vehicles available to high net worth individuals: private foundations, donor-advised funds, charitable remainder trusts. The key is determining what causes or objectives would align with your values and your husband's intentions. Robert's intentions. I think about the man who spent his career designing infrastructure that served entire communities, who chose to live modestly despite growing wealth, who believed that technology should improve life for everyone rather than just enriching the people who developed it. His intentions were always focused on service rather than accumulation. My husband believed that technology should benefit society as a whole, I say slowly. He was excited about innovations that could improve education, healthcare, and environmental sustainability. Those are all areas where strategic philanthropy can have tremendous impact, Marcus responds. And Mrs. Reed, you have the luxury of taking time to develop your philanthropic vision. This portfolio is generating enough income that you could give away substantial amounts annually while still maintaining and growing the principal. The meeting continues for nearly 2 hours as Marcus explains tax strategies, investment options, and the administrative details of managing significant wealth. By the time I leave his office, my head is spinning with information about asset allocation, charitable giving strategies, and the surprising complexity of being rich. But the most important thing I've learned is that Robert's investment success wasn't accidental or lucky. It was the result of systematic research, disciplined patience, and a clear vision of technological progress that most people couldn't see at the time. He didn't just pick winning stocks. He identified the future and invested in it consistently over decades. The drive home takes me through the neighborhood where Sarah lives with her family. On impulse, I turn into her driveway, suddenly needing to share the details of my meeting with someone who will understand both the excitement and the overwhelming nature of what I've learned. Sarah answers the door with flour on her hands and a surprised but pleased expression. Mom, what perfect timing! I'm making cookies with Emma and Jake. Come in, come in. My grandchildren rush to greet me with the enthusiasm that only 8- and 6-year-olds can muster. Emma, always the more talkative of the two, immediately begins explaining the elaborate cookie decorating project they've undertaken, while Jake shyly offers me a misshapen sugar cookie covered in blue frosting. Grandma Kathy, look what I made, Emma announces, holding up a cookie decorated to look like a flower garden. Mom said we could make whatever we wanted, so I made all the flowers from our backyard. The simple joy in her voice reminds me of why Robert worked so hard to build a secure future for our family. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about creating possibilities for the people we love, ensuring that Emma and Jake could pursue their interests and dreams without the financial constraints that limited previous generations. They're beautiful, sweetheart, I tell her, accepting the cookie Jake offers and taking a deliberately enthusiastic bite. Absolutely delicious. Sarah sends the children to wash their hands and leads me into her living room, where evidence of busy family life is scattered across every surface: homework assignments, art projects, sports equipment, and the general cheerful chaos that comes with raising 2 active children. How did the meeting go? She asks, settling into the chair across from me. Enlightening, and overwhelming, and wonderful, and terrifying. Sarah laughs at my contradictory description. That sounds about right for discovering you're a multimillionaire. Did you learn anything new about Dad's investment strategy? I learned that your father was essentially a technological visionary who happened to work as an engineer instead of a venture capitalist. Marcus showed me research reports Robert wrote in the 1990s about companies that most people had never heard of. He predicted the rise of internet commerce, social media, electric vehicles, and digital entertainment years before these things became mainstream. That sounds like Dad. He was always reading about emerging technologies and explaining why they mattered. I remember him telling me in high school that someday everyone would carry a computer in their pocket that was more powerful than the machines NASA used to send people to the moon. And he bought Apple stock based on that prediction when most people thought the company was finished. We sit in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us processing the magnitude of Robert's foresight and the wealth it created for our family. But I can see something else in Sarah's expression, a thoughtfulness that suggests she's working through implications that extend beyond simple financial security. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. What are you going to do with all this money? The question I've been avoiding since my discovery 3 weeks ago hangs in the air between us. What am I going to do with $20 million? How does someone who's lived modestly for 65 years suddenly become a person who makes decisions about significant wealth? I honestly don't know, I admit. Part of me wants to keep living exactly as I have been, just with less worry about expenses. But another part of me feels like I have obligations now, responsibilities to use this money in ways that would make your father proud. What kind of responsibilities? Marcus talked about philanthropic options, ways to support causes that align with your father's values, education, healthcare, environmental protection, technology that serves the public. Good. Sarah nods thoughtfully. That does sound like something Dad would have wanted. He always believed that people who were fortunate had obligations to help others. But I also think he'd want me to enjoy some of the financial freedom he created. To travel, to pursue interests I've put aside, to experience things we always planned to do together but never got around to doing. Why not do both? Sarah suggests. Why not use part of the money for philanthropy and part of it for your own happiness? It's such a simple question, but it illuminates something I've been struggling with since learning about the portfolio. I've been thinking about the money as if I had to choose between honoring Robert's memory and pursuing my own desires, as if enjoying financial freedom would somehow diminish the value of his legacy. You're right, I say slowly. There's no reason I can't do both. Mom, you could fund scholarship programs and also take that trip to Ireland you've always talked about. You could support environmental research and also renovate the house exactly the way you want it. You could establish a foundation in Dad's name and also buy a condo in Florida for the winters. A condo in Florida. The idea had never occurred to me, but suddenly it seems wonderfully appealing. Somewhere warm and bright where I could escape the harsh winters that have become more difficult as I've gotten older. A place where I could read and walk on the beach and maybe even learn to paint the landscapes I've always admired in other people's artwork. I went to see the house again yesterday, Sarah continues, and I can hear a change in her tone that suggests this conversation is heading somewhere more complex. What do you mean you went to see it again? I mean, I walked through it with different eyes, knowing what I know now about your financial situation. And Mom, I owe you a bigger apology than I realized. What kind of apology? Sarah stands up and begins pacing the way she does when she's processing difficult emotions. I spent months pressuring you to sell a house that you love, to get rid of belongings that connect you to Dad, to basically abandon the life you'd built together. And I did it all because I thought I was helping you face financial reality. You were trying to help, I say gently. But I wasn't listening. I wasn't paying attention to what you actually wanted or needed. I was so convinced that I understood your situation better than you did that I never considered the possibility that you might have good reasons for your choices. Sarah, you couldn't have known about the investments. I didn't know about them. Myself. That's not the point, Mom. The point is that I should have respected your autonomy regardless of your financial situation. I should have supported your choices instead of trying to manage them. The conversation is interrupted by Emma and Jake running back into the room, their hands clean but their excitement undiminished. They climb onto the couch beside me, and Emma immediately begins describing her plans for the next batch of cookies. Grandma Kathy, will you help us make cookies that look like cars? Jake wants to make a racetrack out of frosting, and I want to make cookies that look like the cars Daddy drives. I would love to help you make car cookies, I tell her, and I mean it completely. This is what matters most about the wealth Robert accumulated. Not the luxury it could buy or the status it might provide, but the security it offers for moments exactly like this one. The knowledge that Emma and Jake will have opportunities to pursue their dreams, that Sarah and David won't have to worry about college tuition or retirement planning, that our family has the foundation to focus on what truly matters. We spend the next hour in Sarah's kitchen, creating elaborate cookie decorations and laughing at our increasingly absurd attempts to make frosting look like automobile parts. The children's joy is infectious, and I find myself relaxing into the simple pleasure of being present with people I love. But as the afternoon progresses, I notice Sarah watching me with an expression I can't quite interpret. She's quieter than usual, and I sense there's something else she wants to discuss but isn't sure how to bring up. After the children lose interest in cookie decorating and drift away to play video games, Sarah and I clean the kitchen in companionable silence. But as I'm preparing to leave, she finally voices whatever has been on her mind. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react to it. The serious tone in her voice immediately puts me on alert. What is it? David and I have been having financial problems. More serious problems than I've let you know about. My first instinct is protective concern, followed quickly by relief that I now have resources to help whatever difficulties they're facing. What kind of problems? David's company has been struggling since the economic downturn last year. He's had his hours cut significantly, and we're behind on our mortgage payments. We've been trying to handle it ourselves, but honestly, we're running out of options. The admission clearly costs her significant pride, and I can see how difficult it is for someone who's spent the last year trying to manage my life to confess that her own life needs managing. How far behind are you on the mortgage? 3 months. And the bank has started foreclosure proceedings. 3 months. Foreclosure proceedings. The words hit me like physical blows as I realized that while I was sitting in my comfortable house worrying about property taxes I could easily afford, my daughter was facing the possibility of losing her home. Sarah, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because what could you have done? I thought you were living on a fixed income, barely making ends meet yourself. I couldn't ask you to solve problems with money you didn't have. But I did have money. I had $20 million sitting in investment accounts while my daughter was struggling to keep her family's home. The irony is almost unbearable. How much do you need? I ask. Mom, I'm not telling you this because I want money. I'm telling you because I realized that while I was pressuring you to make practical decisions about your finances, I wasn't being honest about my own situation. But now I can help. Now I have resources that can solve these problems immediately. Sarah sits down heavily at her kitchen table, and I can see the exhaustion she's been hiding behind her competent facade. It's not just about the immediate crisis. David's industry is changing, and his job isn't secure even if we catch up on the mortgage payments. We need to rethink our entire financial situation. Then we'll rethink it together. Sarah, this is exactly the kind of situation your father built this wealth to address. Family security, making sure the people we love have stable foundations for their lives. But I feel terrible about it. Here I was, lecturing you about facing financial reality while I was avoiding my own financial reality. I sit down across from her and reach for her hands. You were trying to take care of me because you thought I needed taking care of. That's what loving people do. And now I'm going to take care of you because I can. It doesn't feel right. Accepting help from my mother when I'm 35 years old and should be managing my own problems. Sarah, this isn't about age or independence. This is about family taking care of family when circumstances make that possible and necessary. We talk for another hour about practical solutions to their immediate crisis and longer-term strategies for financial stability. By the time I leave her house, we've outlined a plan that will eliminate their mortgage debt entirely and create an educational fund for Emma and Jake that will ensure their college expenses are covered regardless of what happens with David's career. But more importantly, we've had the kind of honest conversation about money and family obligations that I wish we'd been able to have months ago. Sarah's financial struggles don't diminish her competence or independence. They're simply circumstances that require adaptation and support. Driving home through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I'm struck by how much has changed in the 3 weeks since I discovered Robert's investment legacy. I'm not just wealthier than I expected. I'm more connected to my family's real needs and concerns, more aware of the opportunities that financial security creates, and more conscious of the responsibilities that come with unexpected resources. The house feels different when I walk through the front door. It's still filled with the same furniture and belongings that Sarah once considered clutter, but now they seem like treasures I have the luxury of preserving rather than burdens I'm too sentimental to release. I settle into Robert's chair in his study and open the investment journal to a passage I've been thinking about since my meeting with Marcus Chen. The goal of accumulating wealth, Robert wrote, should never be accumulation for its own sake. Money is stored energy that can be converted into education, security, opportunity, and service. The question isn't how much wealth you can gather, but how effectively you can deploy that wealth to improve life for the people and causes you care about. Deploy wealth to improve life. That's exactly what I want to do, but I'm only beginning. To understand what deployment means in practical terms, how do you effectively help people without creating dependency? How do you support causes without imposing your own vision on organizations that might have different approaches? How do you balance immediate family needs with broader philanthropic goals? These are questions I never expected to wrestle with at 65. Challenges that require the same kind of patience and research Robert brought to his investment decisions. But they're good problems to have, meaningful ways to spend the time and energy I have left. Tomorrow, I'll call Marcus Chen and begin the process of restructuring my financial life to reflect both my responsibilities and my possibilities. I'll establish funds for Emma and Jake's education, create mechanisms for supporting the causes Robert cared about, and explore options for my own enrichment and enjoyment. But tonight, I'm content to sit in the house we built together, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived, grateful for the foundation Robert created, and excited about the possibilities it represents for everyone our love touches. The phone rings at 7 in the morning, jarring me awake from dreams where Robert and I were walking through a house with endless rooms, each one filled with possibilities we'd never explored together. Sarah's voice carries an edge of panic that instantly clears the fog of sleep from my mind. "Mom, I need you to come over right away. Something's happened." "What kind of something?" I ask, already reaching for my robe and slippers. "David lost his job yesterday. Not just reduced hours this time. They eliminated his entire department." The words land like stones in still water, sending ripples of concern through the careful plans we'd made just days earlier. I'd transferred enough money to bring their mortgage current and establish the children's education fund, but we hadn't anticipated David's employment situation deteriorating this rapidly. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I tell her, already, moving toward my closet to find clothes appropriate for whatever crisis management the day might require. The drive to Sarah's house takes me through the industrial district where David has worked for 12 years, designing marketing campaigns for manufacturing companies that are apparently no longer thriving in the current economic climate. The parking lots that used to be full of employees' cars are half empty now, and several buildings display the kind of for lease signs that suggest entire businesses have simply disappeared. Sarah meets me at her front door still wearing the clothes she had on yesterday, her hair disheveled in a way that suggests she's been pacing through the night rather than sleeping. Behind her, I can hear the sounds of Emma and Jake getting ready for school, their voices carrying the oblivious cheerfulness of children who don't yet understand that their world has shifted overnight. He came home at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon with a box of his personal belongings and a severance package that amounts to 2 weeks' pay, Sarah says without preamble. The company is filing for bankruptcy. There's no negotiation, no possibility of reduced hours or temporary layoffs. Just gone. I follow her into the kitchen, where David sits at the table staring at paperwork spread in front of him like evidence of some crime he can't quite comprehend. He looks up when I enter, and the expression on his face reminds me of how Robert looked in the weeks after his first heart attack, when he realized that the future he'd planned might not unfold according to his careful projections. "Kathy, I'm sorry you have to see us like this," he says, attempting to stand in a gesture of politeness that seems absurd under the circumstances. "David, please. We're family. This is exactly when family should see each other." He settles back into his chair, and I notice that his hands are shaking slightly as he shuffles through the severance documents. 12 years of steady employment, of reliable income and health insurance and retirement contributions, reduced to a form letter thanking him for his service and wishing him luck in his future endeavors. The unemployment benefits will cover about 60% of his salary, Sarah explains, but only for 6 months, and that's assuming he qualifies. And, of course, we lose the health insurance immediately. Health insurance. The phrase strikes me with particular force because it represents the kind of practical concern that money alone can't immediately solve. I can write checks to cover mortgage payments and grocery bills, but replacing employer-sponsored health coverage requires navigating bureaucratic systems that don't accommodate sudden life changes very efficiently. "What about COBRA?" I ask, remembering the healthcare continuation program that Robert and I researched when he was considering early retirement. 18 months of coverage at full cost, David answers, which would be about $1,400 a month for family coverage. $1,400 a month. Before discovering Robert's investment portfolio, that amount would have represented a significant portion of my own monthly budget. Now it's a minor expense that I can easily absorb. But the psychological impact on David and Sarah is clearly devastating. Emma and Jake choose this moment to bound into the kitchen, backpacks ready, and faces bright with anticipation of the school day ahead. Emma immediately begins chattering about a science project on renewable energy, while Jake quietly helps himself to cereal, both children completely unaware that their parents spent the night recalculating the basic economics of their family life. "Grandma Kathy!" Emma exclaims, apparently delighted by my unexpected early morning appearance. "Are you having breakfast with us? Mom made pancakes yesterday, but I think we only have cereal today." "Cereal sounds perfect," I tell her, accepting the bowl Jake solemnly offers me and trying to project the kind of calm normalcy that children need when their world is shifting in ways they can't understand. Sarah manages the morning routine with the kind of determined efficiency that suggests she's compartmentalizing her anxiety to protect the children from adult concerns they're not ready to process. She packs lunches, checks homework folders, and issues reminders about after-school activities as if this is just another ordinary Tuesday, rather than the day after their family's financial foundation collapsed. But I can see the effort it takes to maintain this facade, the way her smile becomes slightly forced when Emma asks if Daddy will be able to drive her to soccer practice this afternoon. The pause before she answers Jake's question about whether they're still planning to visit the Science Museum this weekend. After the children leave for school, the three of us sit in the kitchen surrounded by the debris of a family breakfast and the paperwork documenting David's sudden unemployment. The contrast between domestic normalcy and financial crisis feels surreal, like watching a play where the actors are performing different scripts simultaneously. "I've been thinking about this all night," Sarah says, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. We need to sell the house. Sell the house. The words echo the conversation we had weeks ago about my own living situation, but with a different kind of urgency. Sarah isn't talking about downsizing for lifestyle reasons or moving closer to amenities. She's talking about liquidating their largest asset to survive an economic emergency. You don't need to sell the house, I say quietly. Mom, I know you want to help, and I'm grateful for what you've already done with the mortgage, but this isn't a temporary problem we can solve. With a loan, David's industry is contracting, and finding comparable employment could take months or even years. Then we'll plan for months or years, I reply. Sarah, you're acting as if you're facing these challenges alone, as if the only resources available to your family are David's income and your savings, but that's not true anymore. David looks up from the severance papers with an expression that suggests he's been following our conversation without really believing it applies to his situation. Kathy, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't accept charity from my mother-in-law. I need to find a way to support my own family. Charity. The word stings because it mischaracterizes both my motivations and my capabilities. This isn't about charity or pity or diminishing David's role as a provider. It's about family resources being available when family members need them. David, this isn't charity. This is family taking care of family during a difficult transition. Robert spent 40 years building financial security not just for me, but for everyone we love. This is exactly the kind of situation he prepared for. But it feels like failure, David admits, and the honesty in his voice breaks my heart. I'm supposed to be able to provide for my wife and children. I'm supposed to be the one who solves problems, not the one who creates them. I recognize the pride and pain in his words because I heard similar sentiments from Robert during the brief periods when his own employment was uncertain. The cultural expectation that men should be primary providers creates additional emotional complexity during times when circumstances beyond their control disrupt their ability to fulfill that role. David, providing for your family doesn't just mean earning the money. It means accepting help when help is available, making smart decisions about resources regardless of where those resources originate, and focusing on what's best for Emma and Jake rather than what feels most comfortable for your ego. Sarah reaches across the table to take David's hand, and I can see her struggling between her desire to protect his feelings and her recognition that accepting my help might be the most practical solution to their immediate crisis. What are you suggesting? She asks me. I'm suggesting that we treat this as an opportunity rather than a disaster. David has skills and experience that are valuable in multiple industries. Rather than taking the first job he can find just to replace his income quickly, he could take time to explore career options that might offer better long-term prospects. But that could take months, David objects. Then it takes months. You have mortgage-free housing, health insurance through my resources, and enough financial support to maintain your current lifestyle while David pursues the right opportunity rather than just any opportunity. The conversation continues for nearly 2 hours as we work through the practical details of transitioning from their previous financial independence to temporary dependence on family resources. David's resistance is understandable but ultimately impractical given the reality of their situation. By the time we've outlined a basic support structure, David seems less defensive about accepting help and more focused on developing a strategic approach to his job search. We agree that he'll work with a career counselor to explore options beyond his previous industry, potentially retraining for sectors that are growing rather than contracting. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Sarah says as I'm preparing to leave. The realtor called this morning. What realtor? The one I contacted weeks ago about getting the house appraised for sale. She wants to schedule a showing for potential buyers this afternoon. The request catches me completely off guard. In all our discussions about David's job loss and their financial challenges, I hadn't considered that Sarah might have already set other plans in motion based on assumptions that are no longer valid. You don't need to sell the house now, I remind her. I know that intellectually. But Mom, emotionally, I'm still processing the idea that our financial situation has changed so dramatically. Part of me keeps thinking this is all temporary, that you'll change your mind about helping us, or that the money will disappear somehow. Her confession reveals the psychological complexity of accepting financial help from family members. Even when the assistance is offered generously and without conditions, the recipient often struggles with feelings of vulnerability and uncertainty about the permanence of the support. Sarah, the money isn't going to disappear. Your father built this wealth specifically to provide security for our family across multiple generations. You're not accepting temporary charity. You're accessing resources that belong to all of us. Then I should cancel the showing? That's up to you, but make the decision based on what you want, rather than what you think you have to do. After I leave their house, I drive aimlessly through neighborhoods I've known for decades, trying to process the morning's revelations and their implications for our family's future. David's job loss changes the immediate dynamics of their financial situation, but it also creates opportunities for longer-term planning that might not have been possible if he'd remained employed in an industry that was slowly contracting. The irony isn't lost on me that while Sarah was pressuring me to downsize and simplify my living situation, she was simultaneously facing the possibility of losing her own home to foreclosure. We were both carrying financial anxieties that we hadn't fully shared with each other, both making assumptions about each other's situations that prevented us from having honest conversations about our actual needs and resources. My phone rings as I'm sitting in the parking lot of the grocery store where Robert and I used to shop together every Saturday morning. Sarah's name appears on the display, and her voice carries a different energy than it had during our kitchen conversation. Mom, I canceled the realtor showing. How do you feel about that decision? Relieved, and a little scared, and grateful. It's complicated. Most important decisions are complicated, I tell her. That's why we take time to consider all the factors before making choices that can't easily be undone. David's already started researching career counseling services. I think he's actually excited about the possibility of changing directions professionally. He's been unhappy with his job for years, but he felt trapped by our financial obligations. This revelation adds another layer to my understanding of their situation. David's job loss, while initially traumatic, might ultimately prove to be a liberation from work that wasn't fulfilling or sustainable. Financial security from family resources creates space for him to pursue career options based on potential and interest, rather than immediate necessity. What about you? I ask. How are you feeling about all of this? Better than I expected. For months, I've been carrying this weight of financial worry, trying to manage problems I couldn't solve with resources I didn't have. Now I feel like I can breathe again. The relief in her voice reminds me of my own experience discovering Robert's investment portfolio. The transformation from financial anxiety to financial security happens quickly in practical terms, but emotionally, it requires time to fully absorb and integrate. We agree to meet for lunch later in the week to discuss longer-term planning for both our families. Sarah wants to explore educational opportunities for herself now that childcare costs and mortgage payments are no longer pressing concerns. She's always been interested in nonprofit management, and my newfound wealth creates possibilities for her to gain experience in philanthropic organizations that align with our family's values. The remainder of the afternoon passes quietly as I attend to mundane tasks that feel surprisingly meaningful in the context of our family's changing circumstances. Grocery shopping when you don't have to calculate the cost of every item feels different. Paying bills when you know the checking account balance is irrelevant to your financial security creates a sense of freedom that's still novel enough to be consciously appreciated. But the most significant change is the awareness that my decisions now affect not just my own life, but the lives of people I love in ways that extend far beyond my own lifetime. The money Robert accumulated through patient investing has become a tool for creating opportunities and security that will influence Emma and Jake's futures, Sarah and David's career choices, and my own possibilities for meaningful engagement with causes I care about. Evening finds me in Robert's study, reading through his investment journal and trying to understand the philosophical foundation that guided his financial decisions. One passage, written shortly before he died, seems particularly relevant to our current family situation. "The greatest satisfaction of accumulating wealth," he wrote, "comes not from the lifestyle it enables for yourself, but from the possibilities it creates for the people you love. Money that sits unused in accounts is just numbers on statements. Money that enables education, opportunity, security, and service becomes a living extension of your values across time." A living extension of your values across time. That's exactly what I want this wealth to become. Not just financial security for its own sake, but resources that enable our family members to pursue meaningful work, support causes that matter to us, and create positive change in ways that honor Robert's memory while serving contemporary needs. Tomorrow, I'll call Marcus Chen to discuss establishing more formal structures for family financial support and philanthropic giving. I'll explore options for funding David's career transition, supporting Sarah's educational goals, and creating endowments that will benefit Emma and Jake throughout their lives. But tonight, I'm content to sit in the chair where Robert planned our financial future, surrounded by evidence of his foresight and generosity, grateful for the foundation he created, and excited about the possibilities it represents for everyone our love touches. The house settles around me with the familiar sounds of aging wood and shifting foundations, and I realize that these walls contain not just memories of the past, but blueprints for the future. Robert's investment strategy was never just about accumulating money. It was about creating tools that could be used to build better lives for the people and causes we care about across multiple generations. Understanding that distinction changes everything about how I approach this unexpected wealth and the responsibilities it entails. 6 months have passed since David lost his job, and the transformation in our family's dynamics has been more profound than any of us anticipated. What began as a crisis has evolved into an opportunity for each of us to reconsider our assumptions about work, security, and the relationship between financial resources and personal fulfillment. David completed his certification in renewable energy systems design last month, a career transition that combines his engineering background with the environmental values Robert always championed. The retraining program was expensive, but watching David's enthusiasm return as he studied technologies that could help address climate change made every dollar worthwhile. He starts his new position next week with a clean energy consulting firm, earning slightly less than his previous salary, but working in an industry with genuine growth potential. Sarah has enrolled in a graduate program in nonprofit management, attending classes in the evenings while Emma and Jake are with their father or spending time with me. She's discovered a passion for organizational leadership that was completely suppressed during the years when financial stress dominated every decision. Her research project focuses on family foundations and the most effective strategies for deploying private wealth toward public benefit. But the most unexpected development has been the change in my own daily routine and sense of purpose. Working with Marcus Chen to establish the Robert Reed Foundation has given me a crash course in philanthropic strategy that's both intellectually stimulating and emotionally satisfying. We've committed $5 million over the next decade to support educational programs that introduce children to environmental science and sustainable technology. This morning, I'm meeting with the principal of Emma and Jake's elementary school to discuss funding a new science laboratory that will serve as a model for hands-on environmental education. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm now the kind of person who can write checks large enough to transform educational institutions, when just a year ago I was worried about whether I could afford to maintain my own home. Principal Martinez greets me in her office with the respectful attention that significant donors apparently receive from educational administrators. She's prepared a detailed presentation about the current science curriculum and the enhancements that additional funding could support. Mrs. Reed, we're incredibly grateful for your family's interest in our environmental science program, she begins, spreading architectural drawings across her desk. The laboratory space you're proposing to fund would serve not just our students, but also provide professional development opportunities for teachers throughout the district. The drawings show a bright modern space filled with equipment that will allow children to conduct real experiments in renewable energy, water purification, and sustainable agriculture. Emma and Jake will learn about solar panels and wind turbines, not just from textbooks, but by building working models and measuring their efficiency. My husband always believed that children learn best when they can see how scientific principles apply to real-world problems, I tell her. This laboratory should help students understand that environmental challenges require both technical knowledge and creative problem-solving. As we discuss implementation timelines and coordination with the district's curriculum committee, I'm struck by how natural this feels. A year ago, the idea of funding educational initiatives would have seemed completely foreign to my experience. Now it feels like a logical extension of the values Robert and I shared throughout our marriage. The meeting concludes with agreements to begin construction during the summer break, ensuring the laboratory will be ready when school resumes in the fall. Emma and Jake will be among the first students to benefit from equipment that their great-grandfather's patient investing made possible. Driving home, I reflect on the strange circularity of events that brought us to this point. Sarah's criticism of my living in the past inadvertently led to the discovery of investments that now fund our family's future. David's job loss, initially devastating, created space for him to pursue work that aligns with his values rather than just his immediate financial needs. My own resistance to change transformed into enthusiastic engagement with philanthropic opportunities I never could have imagined. The phone rings as I'm turning into my driveway, and Sarah's voice carries excitement that immediately captures my attention. "Mom, I have news that's going to surprise you." Good surprise or concerning surprise? Definitely good, but also a little complicated. I've been selected for a fellowship program that would allow me to spend next summer working with foundation executives in Europe, studying different approaches to family philanthropy. Sarah, that's wonderful, but you said it's complicated? The fellowship covers all expenses for the fellow, but not for family members. David and I have been discussing whether I should accept, given that it would mean being apart for 3 months. 3 months in Europe, studying exactly the kind of philanthropic strategies that our family is now positioned to implement. The opportunity seems perfectly aligned with Sarah's new educational focus and our foundation's long-term objectives. What does David think about it? He's supportive, especially since his new job includes flexibility for remote work. He could potentially join me for part of the summer, and of course Emma and Jake could visit during their school break. It sounds like an incredible opportunity. What's holding you back? Honestly, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the money to disappear, or for you to change your mind about supporting us, or for something to go wrong that reminds me this is all too good to be true. The vulnerability in her admission reveals how difficult it can be to accept that positive change is real and sustainable. After years of financial stress and limited options, sudden abundance creates its own psychological challenges. Sarah, I understand that feeling. But this isn't temporary good fortune that might evaporate. Your father built this wealth systematically over decades specifically to create opportunities like this one. You're not taking advantage of a windfall. You're using resources that were always intended for our family's benefit. I know that intellectually, but emotionally I'm still adjusting to the idea that I can make choices based on what I want rather than what I can afford. That adjustment takes time, but I hope you'll accept the fellowship, not just because it's a great opportunity for you, but because it will help our foundation become more effective at achieving the goals your father would have supported. After we hang up, I walk through my house with renewed appreciation for the space Robert and I created together. The furniture Sarah once considered outdated now seems charmingly timeless. The investment documents she dismissed as clutter have revealed themselves to be blueprints for our family's expanded possibilities. But the most significant change is in my own relationship to the future. A year ago, I was focused primarily on preserving the past, maintaining connections to the life Robert and I had shared. Now I'm actively building toward a future that honors his memory while creating new experiences and opportunities. The doorbell interrupts my contemplation, and I'm surprised to find Emma and Jake on my front porch with David, all three of them wearing expressions of barely contained excitement. "Grandma Kathy," Emma announces, "Dad brought us to show you something really cool." "We learned about solar panels at school today," Jake adds, "and Dad said you might want to see what he's working on for his new job." David carries a briefcase filled with what appears to be miniature versions of renewable energy equipment. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit, but the kids insisted that you'd be interested in seeing some of the technology I'll be designing systems for." We settle in the living room, where David spreads small solar panels, wind turbine models, and battery storage units across my coffee table. Emma and Jake immediately begin asking questions about how electricity flows from the solar panels to the batteries, their curiosity reminding me of Robert's fascination with emerging technologies. "This is exactly the kind of equipment that will be in the school laboratory we're funding," I tell them. "You'll be able to conduct experiments with real renewable energy systems." "Can we build a solar panel for your house, Grandma?" Emma asks. "Dad said solar panels can make electricity from sunlight, and your house gets lots of sun in the backyard." The question sparks an idea that hadn't occurred to me before. My house, with its large south-facing roof and minimal shading from neighboring trees, would be an ideal candidate for solar installation. More importantly, it would provide a practical demonstration of the renewable energy technologies that our foundation supports through educational programs. "That's a wonderful idea, Emma. David, would you be able to design a solar system for this house as one of your first projects?" "Absolutely. And given the size and orientation of your roof, we could probably generate enough electricity to power the entire house, possibly with surplus to sell back to the utility grid." The conversation continues for an hour as David explains different renewable energy options, and the children ask increasingly sophisticated questions about energy storage and grid integration. Watching my grandchildren engage with concepts that Robert would have found fascinating creates a sense of continuity that bridges past vision with future implementation. After they leave, I call Marcus Chen to discuss adding solar installation to the list of home improvements that our newfound wealth makes possible. But more than the practical benefits, I'm drawn to the symbolic value of powering my home with renewable energy, creating a daily reminder of the environmental values that guided Robert's investment philosophy. "Mrs. Reed," Marcus says when I explain the solar project, "I think your husband would be delighted that his technology investments are now funding technology implementation in your own home. I think he'd also be pleased that his grandchildren are learning about renewable energy in school laboratories that his investments made possible." There's a beautiful circularity to that. Patient capital invested in emerging technologies eventually funds education about those same technologies for the next generation. Patient capital. The phrase captures something essential about Robert's approach to both investing and life planning. He understood that the most important outcomes often require decades to fully materialize. That true success comes from consistent action toward long-term objectives rather than dramatic gestures aimed at immediate results. That evening, I sit in Robert's study reading through his final journal entries, written during the weeks before his death when he knew his time was limited, but his mind remained focused on the future he was creating for our family. "I hope Kathy will discover that the investments we made together represent more than financial security," he wrote. "They represent faith in human ingenuity, confidence in technological progress, and commitment to environmental sustainability. The money is just a tool. The real legacy is the values it can be used to support." The real legacy is the values it can be used to support. That insight has guided every decision I've made since discovering the true extent of our portfolio. The wealth Robert accumulated isn't an end in itself. It's a means of extending our shared values across time, creating opportunities for education, environmental protection, and family security that will influence people we'll never meet in ways we can't fully anticipate. 6 months ago, Sarah accused me of living in the past, unable to adapt to present realities or plan for the future. She wasn't entirely wrong, but she also wasn't entirely right. I was preserving important connections to a life that had meaning and value. The challenge was learning how to honor those connections while remaining open to new possibilities. Now I understand that living in the past and building toward the future aren't mutually exclusive. The values Robert and I developed, together, the love we shared, the vision we held for our family's welfare, these aren't relics to be preserved in a museum. They're living principles that can guide decision-making and resource allocation for decades to come. The solar panels that will soon cover my roof will generate clean electricity for years after I'm gone. The school laboratory that bears Robert's name will introduce thousands of children to environmental science concepts that might inspire them to pursue careers in renewable energy. The foundation we've established will continue supporting educational programs long after our immediate family has benefited from the opportunities it creates. But perhaps most importantly, Emma and Jake will grow up understanding that wealth carries responsibility, that financial resources are tools for serving purposes larger than personal comfort, and that the most satisfying use of money involves creating opportunities for other people to pursue their own dreams and aspirations. Tomorrow, Sarah will call to accept the European Fellowship, confident that our family's financial foundation will support her absence and her professional development. David will submit his first renewable energy system design, combining his technical skills with environmental values that align with our foundation's mission. And I'll continue learning how to be a philanthropist, discovering that giving money away thoughtfully requires as much skill and research as accumulating it in the first place. The house settles around me with familiar sounds, but everything feels different now. This isn't a museum preserving memories of the past. It's a headquarters for building the future that Robert envisioned, a place where past investments continue generating present opportunities for future benefit. I close the journal and walk to the window that overlooks the backyard, where solar panels will soon harvest sunshine and convert it into electricity that powers both my daily life and my long-term commitments to the causes we care about. The past and future converge in this moment, in this house, in the ongoing project of using resources wisely to create possibilities that extend far beyond our own lives. Robert's investments in technology companies have become investments in our grandchildren's education, our family's security, and our community's environmental future. What began as faith in emerging technologies has evolved into practical support for the next generation's ability to address challenges we're only beginning to understand. That transformation from private accumulation to public benefit represents the most satisfying discovery of this entire experience. We're not just wealthy now. We're responsible for using that wealth in ways that honor the values that created it, while serving needs that extend far beyond our own family's immediate concerns. The phone rings one final time tonight, and Emma's voice carries the excitement of a child who's just made an important connection. "Grandma Kathy, I figured out why Grandpa's investments were so smart." "Tell me, sweetheart." "He didn't just buy companies that made money. He bought companies that made things better for people and for the earth. That's why his investments kept growing even when he wasn't watching them anymore." Out of the mouths of babes, Emma has articulated something it took me months to understand. Robert's investment success wasn't based on financial analysis alone. It was based on identifying companies whose products and services aligned with his values, whose growth would contribute to positive change rather than simply generating profits. "You're absolutely right, Emma. Grandpa believed that the best investments are in companies that make the world better. And now we get to do the same thing with his money." "Yes, sweetheart. Now we get to do the same thing." Up next, You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.